There we go. In the meantime, I just want to, first of all, welcome you. We're still just working at the kinks of the live stream between Hopkins and Toronto. My name is Mobdi Rahman, and along with Marcelo Ponce, we are the two people sort of coordinating this hackathon on the Toronto side. You'll meet a lot of our Hopkins colleagues. In a second, you've seen Bonnie, who has been the point person for logistics on the Hopkins side. We're hoping for a very exciting couple of days in terms of dealing with visualization, trying to deal with a number of challenges that come with the big data and machine learning side of things. We're slowly getting set up. We'll be doing a shared intro just in terms of some of the logistics and some of the ideas behind how we want to structure the hackathon. A big part of this is for shared information between disciplines and between universities, especially with the challenges of big data and visualization. These are challenges that many fields are facing, and a lot of us, myself included, tend to have a notion of siloing ourselves and trying to solve this problem alone, but there are often resources just in the other building or just an email away. And so we're trying to build a little bit of shared knowledge and perhaps some shared tools that come out of this as well. So we will start the intro in a little bit as soon as we get the Hopkins side. They're starting a little late, just things are a bit frantic in Baltimore at the moment. But after we do a shared intro and do some logistics, we'll go around the room and sort of see where everyone's coming from, what their background is, and hopefully introduce everyone to some new friends and some new coding partners. Thanks. Just as a preliminary, has everyone joined the hackathon Slack? Because that'll be our primary source of how we communicate back and forth.
Can you hear this?
Yes.
All right. So basically, this is our the second visualization hackathon that was on machine learning and more. We'll have this one, visualization hackathon, is held by me with University of Toronto, and we're great to have Rusty Rollins doing presentation 11 about sort of an overview. Actually, I'd like to introduce it. The new talk will be data visualization in the era of big data and machine learning. We can do everything. So we are sort of looking at IDIES in the annual event, probably about every 5 or 6 months. So the next one after the end of the grade with public exhibition and around and on the next time doing what your dissertations are. What happens while we have around an agenda for you? On the agenda, I broke it out into two columns because they actually have 3 rooms in Hopkins. They have only one room in Toronto, but I'll let them fill that a bit. But here we have 3 rooms. So this is the presentation room, so we'll tell them to do popular today. And here we also have next work in. They don't want to do whatever they're doing. They want to be able to work without interruption. And we also have another class over there, which is the if you're doing any 3D type visualization, welcome to that. If you're not, and just wanting to shout at each other and gesticulate over the monitor, that's fine. That would be the place to do it. You don't really want to shout at each other. It's just yeah. Okay, so we're looking out here at some catering food around lunchtime, and then more talking about the invitation tomorrow. But you're really saying that we lunch this spring. I didn't hear any of the guys. So people are going doing this online as well. They'll be watching the talks online. So when we get online and stuff people online will be able to ask questions class. So Carl later, we'll put up ideas on Slack.com to do that tonight. Yeah, it is a Slack later. So if you haven't already on Slack, there'll be where there's announcements in general, questions and answers to talk for online groups. So we're going to do many now. And we also set up help channels. That's working on where you if you have questions about Python, or Python help now, or questions about R. I don't know anybody in R. Do you know R? All right, great.
Nice. Yeah, so
So if you look on Niagara, or on the click on channels to see what channels are available. We aren't automatically added all channels. Visualization. Okay. So add the channel. There's like a channel for different channels.
If you need help signing up for Slack, just let us signal.
Yeah, you can add videos SciServer Jupyter notebook on follow along. Nice thing about GitHub is just here's what we put in there. They're Jupyter notebooks. They're used online, or at least some of them will. So if you're on GitHub, you should be able to pull it in and follow along on your own. If we do step by step, and SciServer, Jordan already talked about SciServer. So we SciServer group, Jordan is coordinating SciServer. And we'll talk more about SciServer later. This is a shared online computing resource, a project of IDEIES where you can use notebooks and access files, you can access desktops and things like that. Directly, you can access a bunch of Accounting and other databases directly, like right now. Okay, so web page totally updated. Okay. We're going to organize this. This is like a hackathon. You can pick a small problem, visualization problem that you want to work on, or generally as part of your research, you might want to work. You might want to deal with people or and doesn't really matter to us, but we are on a hacking site and help you try to know we got we don't know what they are yet. So we we'll talk more about the work. And finally, I think I mentioned there is an action for that. There's some link around and we'll so anyway. Anyway. So all these things are located on book. Okay, so there's 2 other people who are signed up, but obviously we're not on. All right, so we're gonna cut over to let you guys go around the room and talk a little bit about your interest, what we want to get out of this hackathon, get out of the hackathon. I'm going to hand it over to Jordan at this point. He's going to. All right, yeah, it's being recorded.
So, Toronto people, can you hear us?
We can, yeah.
Bonnie is, if you can't, Bonnie is working on it right now. These people, welcome. I'm glad to see all of you. My name is Jordan Raddick. I'm part of the group here at IDIES, working primarily on Bonnie has a volume on the mic. All right. Let me know. Hi, everybody. For the Toronto people, and here, again, I'm Jordan Matt. I work on the IDEIES team, primarily on SciServer, doing education, outreach, and working with the science community to do the best research and the best education that possibly can the tools that we provided. We think we've provided some pretty useful tools. We'll talk a lot more about what SciServer is as we go throughout this weekend. My primary research interest is in social science, looking at trends in Baltimore City. I'll talk about this a lot more tomorrow, but Baltimore City is famous for having really strong neighborhoods. So it's like 20 different cities in one. And so if you do a research study about Baltimore City, you're losing all of that variation. Just look at the entire, trying to look in more detail at different areas. Exciting. I'll talk more about it tomorrow. Let's go around the room in this direction. Yeah. I will walk around and give the microphone to you so you can, the Toronto people can hear you as well. Let us know who you are, what your and like that.
you guys make any of that? No. Okay, I think we'll try to do separate introductions here. Where is the audio coming from? We are up to 3 different audios, I think. I don't know. There we go. They're muted. All right. Sorry about the insane technical difficulties. I'll just very briefly go over a little bit of what they said, just in case you didn't hear. So, like I said, the hackathon is first time we're co-locating it. As you can see, we're still getting the kinks out. Hopkins has run this one time before. Every time there's a different theme. Last time it was 3D visualization. This time we're doing machine learning because it's quite interesting and topical at the moment. In terms of logistics, we have this room and the room over there. So once we break out into groups, you're welcome to sort of form groups and go to either of the 2 different rooms. Sadly, since this is the first time we're running it and we're trying to prove that this is something that we want to do on a more regular basis. Who's muted? Is it Panoptino? Nope, that's muted. That's muted. We're all muted. Okay. Let's not project Bonnie's face. So sadly, we aren't going to be providing lunch, but the Marth building is fantastic for the selection of food that's available downstairs. So you're free at any point during the hackathon, obviously, to go grab some, there's Starbucks downstairs, there's a Timmy's, I believe, downstairs, there's an excellent food court downstairs. And so feel free to grab some food and bring it up and chat with friends and get hacking together. The goal is to have such a successful hackathon that they can't help but throw money at us for the next time round. In terms of, they were talking a little bit about SciServer. You'll hear more about that throughout this hackathon. SciServer is a project that is being developed through NSF funding in the States. It's open to researchers around the world. And the idea is it gives you a computing environment that's close to your data. So you can pull up R notebooks or Jupyter notebooks very quickly that have access to some of the largest databases that you want and do the computing right there. So one of the big things about that is you then don't need to bring the data over to your site, for instance. And so it's right now being developed at Hopkins, and what they're hoping to do is propagate it out to computing facilities all across the world. So wherever your data happens to be, you can have SciServer, or you can do the computing right there and then. For instance, they've been able to get this working with GPU nodes and the like. So you can actually have, let's say that you want to do some crazy AI convolutional neural network that you don't have the GPU facilities to do at your place. You can just pop up, in your web browser, one of these specific Docker containers that has all of that automated for you, and you can run it through there, and then bring that data back to you, bring the results back to you. So you'll be seeing a couple of examples. Jordan, I know, has been doing a number of examples on that front. So what I'd love to do is actually go around the room and get everyone to sort of introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what brings you to the hackathon. Why was this of interest to you to begin with? And also tell us what the language you're hoping to program in over the next 2 days is. So let's start over here.
Sure.
Oh yeah, I guess we're streaming. All right, you're going to be a YouTube star.
Oh, wow. Hi everyone, my name's Eric. I'm a computing noob. I took Marcella's class and was completely switched on to this kind of stuff. My work is in ecology, which is not all that familiar with machine learning, but I'm hoping to make more use of it in my field. Oh, sorry, R and Python would be, I'm more familiar with R.
My name is George Stein. I am a final year PhD student in cosmology. So I do big cosmological simulations. So I have experience visualizing those in Python mostly. I also am interested in machine learning. Recently did a convolutional neural network project. So I'm thinking maybe some visualization of the layers in that or something going on today. So yeah, that's me.
My name's James Lane. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Astronomy, and I work on Milky Way galactic dynamics with the new big data set from the Gaia satellite. And machine learning's starting to become a big deal in my field, so I'm interested in starting to develop some tools to better explore the data.
My name is Martine, and I'm also a first-year PhD student studying cosmology as well. And I'm interested in machine learning. I don't know much about it yet, but want to learn more. And interested in visualizing data from big cosmological surveys and also from simulations.
Three of you guys didn't tell us what your programming language of choice is.
Oh, also Python.
My name is Jay. I'm from Rotman, the business school, and I'm a staff there. And I don't really have any of my research agenda, but I sometimes help as a research assistant. So recently, there's one project I helped with. So we sort of try to use some of the basic small neural network to fit a surface to answer some finance questions. So we used a little bit of very simple visualization to help with making some decisions during the research. But that's pretty much it. So I hope I can learn more. So I want to see what other people are doing. And for the programming language, right now I'm slightly more comfortable with R, but yeah, Python should be fine. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Emmanuel. I am a postdoc in cells and systems biology. I have background in physics. I've been doing research now in doing a lot of analytics of genomics data, things like GWAS, and I've also been working with doing some machine learning on property and rental data recently. So I've never been to hackathon, so I just wanted to come here and learn and see what people do. I use Python almost exclusively.
For the record, we are not anti-R. We are okay with R.
Hi, my name is Yuan Chengkong. I'm working in the Department of SciNet System Biology, and I'm a bioinformatician, and usually I do data management, and sometimes I also do some data analysis for people. Mostly I'm not using Python, but recently I'm started to learn Python, so I think it's cool. Thank you.
Hello. Hello? Oh, cool. My name is Naif. I have a slightly different background than a lot of the people in this room. More of a back-end person. And when I say back-end, I don't mean like SQL databases, I mean hardware. So, a lot of my experience, I'm familiar with Python, so do some of my software development there. C++. Also going down to hardware, RTL. My experience with machine learning is limited, but I'm currently working on a multi-FPGA, so this multi-accelerator machine learning engine. So for my research, and doing my PhD in computer engineering at U of T. Yeah, so slightly different.
Hi, my name is Joy. I'm also from the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering with the slightly more focus on computer engineering. The reason I joined this hackathon is because so I'm in my second year PhD. In my first year, I took a course in information visualization, and I really enjoyed that. So I wanted to keep up with the community, and I wanted to join this hackathon for that reason. I don't have much experience with machine learning, so I still don't know what project I'll be doing, but probably it will be in Python. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Hassan. I'm also similar background to Naif and Joy, working on FPGA's development. I'm actually working at Intel right now. I graduated. Yeah, yeah. So I'm interested in machine learning. I did another hackathon at U of T that was also involved in machine learning, but I'm not that familiar with visualization, and I'd like to learn more. So probably using Python on the machine learning side, maybe JavaScript for the visualization side for this hackathon.
My name's Matt. I study experimental particle physics with ATLAS at the Large Hadron Collider. I don't know much about machine learning, and I probably know less about visualization in the context of machine learning, but as something that continually rears its head in physics analyses, I thought that would be something that would be worth learning about. I work primarily with C++ and Python, but probably for the hackathon, I'd be more interested in Python, I think.
My name is Natalie Price-Jones. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. I primarily work on figuring out the history of the Milky Way galaxy, which in detail means I do a lot of unsupervised classification. So obviously that presents a lot of interesting challenges on how to visualize those results, which is the main reason I'm here today. And I mostly work in Python.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Marcelo. I work here at SciNet, and my background is in computational astrophysics. So I did simulations of binary neutron stars, binary black holes, and studied gravitational waves from those systems. Languages, Python, R, C, C++, Fortran. that's my background.
And I'm Mokdi Rahman, so I'm the person who's going to be trying to help you guys throughout this entire weekend. My background is actually I'm a big data astronomer, both in the observational sense and the simulation sense. I'm a big Python fanatic. I do know a bit of R and some standard more classical programming languages like C, C++, Basic, Visual Basic. COBOL. No, I don't know COBOL. And a lot of my work has been in visualization. It's one of the reasons why this is actually near and dear to my heart, and especially bridging visualization between different fields and trying to think of large data visualization, how best to do it in ways that we haven't done it yet. And so I'm excited I'll likely be joining you guys in coding in a bit of Python, and I've got some ideas of things that I'd like to try out and would love to get people's feedback. But yeah, so now everyone kind of has a sense of who's in the room. How many of you came in with an idea of something that you want to try out? All right, a couple of you. How many of you guys have no clue whatsoever of what you want to do and are hoping to chat with people for ideas? Fantastic. Okay, so the way that this week or this weekend or these 2 days are going to work is today what we're hoping to do is during the actual hack sessions, we want people to start talking to each other and coming up with ideas. The goal of this hackathon isn't to start a project that takes 5 months and people all complete it 6 months down the line. We're hoping to get something that looks interesting by the end of Saturday. So the way that we want to break it down is today is our day to sort of experiment, to talk to people, come up with ideas, and try to plan for what the notion of, what you'd like to work on, what visualization, whether it be related directly to your research, whether it be something more generic, whether it be related to somebody else's research. So we want you guys sort of chatting and coming up with ideas and potentially prototyping them. Don't be afraid. We have a whiteboard here. Feel free to sketch. We have a couple of different rooms to go into to sort of have breakout sessions. And then the goal is for tomorrow morning, we'll all recollect, we'll sort of every group will present their idea for what they want to do, and we can use feedback from in the room to help make that happen by the end of Saturday. So at Saturday at 4, we'll reconvene and we will present what we have. And so much of this is not about getting, a shiny, flashy product that is, done and fully polished. It's about trying to add some new ideas, and sometimes they'll work, sometimes they won't. And that's great. That's kind of the point of a hackathon. It's an opportunity to do that in a place that, if it doesn't work, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Any questions about the structure of the next 2 days? No. Okay. One of the things that we're very, very happy to have is the support of SciNet, and Marcelo has been fantastic at making that happen and giving us both these facilities. But more than that, SciNet has some fantastic visualization facilities that you guys can play with. This is an opportunity for you guys potentially to hack around with some interesting big facilities that you otherwise may not have access to in your department or in your home computer. So I'm going to let Marcelo actually chat a little bit about that. And yeah.
I have some slides, so I can. Doesn't matter. Oh, it's here. So many of you, because I have seen some familiar faces, already know what SciNet is, but if by any chance you don't, so let me just tell you a little bit about us. So by the way, SciNet is part of U of T, so it's usually the case that people don't know us very well, but we are here at U of T, so it's a good opportunity to have a formal introduction if you haven't heard of us. Let me see if I can make this thing bigger. Everything goes in the desktop, right? There we go. So SciNet is the supercomputer center here at U of T. So one of the advantages of having here at U of T is that we have the largest supercomputers available for research in Canada. So these ones you can use for free because you are part of the research community of U of T. So we have about 5 different consortia across Canada right now that have supercomputers for different academia environments and endeavors. Depending on what is the interest that you have, if you are more interested in accelerator type of environments, I don't know of any that have actually FPGAs, but they have GPUs. So you may go to any of the other consortia. But we specialize, in particular, our supercomputers specialize in homogeneous distributed computing. So we have actually the largest, which is the largest supercomputer right now in the country. It has been deployed less than a year ago right now. So it's brand new, it's called Niagara. It had around 60,000 cores. They are all the same type, Sky, Interconnect, Intel, very nice microprocessors. They have 40 of them in each node, so we have hyper-threading, 80 cores, basically when you use each node. We also have a specialized machine called BlueShin Q. It's a bit of old right now, but it's still in the top 500, which is the main list of where you categorize the different supercomputers in the world. And then we had a bunch of other small clusters. We just started with what was our former cluster, the GPC, a teaching cluster. So especially if you are teaching courses at the university and you need to use supercomputer resources because you want to teach something, we had that's available too. And then we had other experimental systems like P7, P8, KNL, the nice landing Intel microprocessor, and some small GPU cluster if you want to play with those too. So in addition to have the supercomputers, and this is a good opportunity because some of you have been in our courses before, but some of you probably they don't even know that we exist. We have several graduate courses at the university that you can take for credit. We had a scientific computing course that is actually running right now. It's basically C++. Then we had a computational statistics course that runs in the fall. And then we had a data analysis course that is also running in the winter time, but it is at the Scarborough. In addition to that, we have some machine learning workshops, neural network workshops. But what is our flagship event during the summer is our summer school. So we have a high-performance computing summer school, which is actually divided in 3 branches on 3 tracks right now, 3 parallel tracks. One is the traditional HPC, another is data science, and the third one that we started actually 2 years ago now is in biomedical and biogenetics. So we partner with the people from CAMH, so we have experts from that area teaching in that summer school. In addition to that, and I invite you to take a look at this one, is the International High Performance Computing Summer School, which this year is going to be in Japan. This is a kind of a unique opportunity because it's an event that is completely paid. So you apply to the event. It's a tough competition because it's people applying from all over the world. But if you apply to the event, you get your air ticket, your expense, everything covered. And you are there for 1 week. It's a very intense, it's like our summer school, but usually it's in different places around the world. And then we have a long list of other courses. So if you are interested in any of those, just go to courses.scinet.utoronto.ca. In addition to that, we do research, of course. So if you're interested in knowing what kind of research we do, just go to the research-SciNet website. Just a little bit of the supercomputer because it's our brand new kid in the in the house. 60,000 cores. It's a Lenovo machine that has 1,500 nodes. So actually, each node has 40 cores, and with the hyper-threading, you can actually have 80 logical cores. The total performance of the machine is 3.02 or 3 petaflops, floating point operations per second. It has a theoretical limit of 4.6, which make being in the rank number 59 when it was deployed, or 53, I think it was 59 by November. So it's not bad. It's a good machine. Each node also has 200 gigabytes of RAM, so the nodes are beefy in RAM. It runs Linux, of course. It has a very dedicated, a unique way to communicate nodes. It's called a Dragonfly interconnect, and it's kind of adapting routing interconnect. So you try to be smart how to communicate these nodes. So that's making the machine special. In addition to that, if you need to crunch a lot of data, we have something called burst buffer, which is an array of solid-state devices. This is also something quite unique. Not every cluster in the world will have this. It's a space that is dedicated to high I/O, especially for bioinformatic people doing genetics. That can be really, really nice. We don't have GPUs, we don't have local hard drives, but we have a high-performance parallel file system. The other good news is, as I told you, because you are researchers, part of UFT, all of you have access to this machine for free. The only thing that you need to do is just apply for an account. And all this is for free. You don't pay a penny, your supervisor don't pay a penny, your department don't pay a penny. UFT already paid for it. So it's part of your budget, if you wish. So how you do that? Well, you go to the CCDB, which is the Compute Canada database. You just need to register there. You need to ask your PI, your supervisor, to also register there because it's the PIs who actually can sponsor postdocs, associate researchers, students of any kind. Okay? So it's a 2-step process. You ask your supervisor to go there, register. Then you go there, you register there. You will need his ID. So there is a ID, a number that he has to give you. And then you just go again and apply for facilities, and then you click on SciNet, and that's it. As soon as you are done with that, you have a SciNet account, you can log in into the cluster in any of these machines, you can register for any of our courses, and that's it. It usually takes no more than a couple of days, so it's quite fast, the process. Okay? Just some references if you want. The slides with these links are in the website for the hackathon. Reference about Niagara, SciNet, and if you have questions, just shoot us an email. I don't know if my email is there, but if not, you can ask me. I can give you my email. So it was fast. I didn't talk much about the visualization resources, but one of the things that we are working in, we don't have a specialized GPU machines in the cluster, but we have a specialized, or not a specialized, but some reserve nodes where we can actually do visualization. And the other thing I want to show you is we have a GPU server. This is so this machine, because it's big, it has 1,500 nodes. It's not here, it's up in Bonn. But in the office we have a GPU server. And let me see if the thing is going to work. We never know. This one has a powerful GPU. And of course, it runs Linux. So what I did is to create a BNC connection. So if someone wants to try some crazy visualization, it's going to run Linux. But basically, you are connected through BNC. So it's a virtual network connection to the GPU server that is across the hall. If you want, I can take you in a small tour around that room with the servers. Basically, anything that you would like to try with a powerful GPU, for today, we can use this machine. And that's all what I have. Any questions? All right.
Awesome.
It was
so what I'd love to have to do is our next sort of formal talk. So take time now to introduce yourself to each other. You've heard everyone's name, heard a little bit about what you do. So we'd love for people to do so. Sure. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Any questions? All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. I don't see how they would. Yeah.
Well, there's like, did you say you had an idea? Really cool things online.
I have some data that, as I say, I do not supervised classification. So one thing I worked on recently was
all the stuff like
doing classification on the whole data set, and then also doing the same classification, like partitioning the data first into smaller groups.
Okay.
So like doing very broad chunking and then trying to combine
So one of the things I've been wanting to do in general is like
as I've sort of done with this whole project is how you show how things are assigned in an interesting way. There's some research things, but they're not very
So the visualization part of it.
Yeah, like that's essentially like, in as much as I do machine learning,
right.
I use black box out.
And then what people do is like they visualize
the actual presenting of that information is difficult because I'm working with
you have an image.
15 dimensions, 50,000 data points.
And then you take this little like 5x5.
Hard to think about how to
Yeah. I have no idea how to even begin.
That is essentially, like, that's why I'm here, but like the way this was presented to me was more of like a workshop.
But these little things.
Yeah. My
examples would be good. Like I have. Has this kind of work even been visualized elsewhere, as far as you know?
This specific thing, I'm actually reading someone else in our collaboration presented something right now, and their visualization of choice is color-coded matrices, which is not great for conveying information.
It's just kind of different approaches in each layer. It's just kind of like how the training works. Usually, like
particle physics.
I think I had it up last night.
One of the physics.
One of the things, yeah. No, I don't really know. I just know that people use like I feel like
whichever one
well, there's like most as you get deeper, I don't know, they have like certain like particle signatures that they're looking for, and that's like the signal, and then there's a ton of other like simulated background. You're just trying to like, either using like neural nets or like boosted decision trees or something like that, and it's just trying to come up with some sort of discriminant like the signal and separate from the
Is it a question of like, do you have reference for the signal you're looking for in some way, or are you looking?
Like in the art, I don't really care about doing it before.
I get chronic fatigue syndrome. I just get, it's like a paranoia. Now I know it's a real thing. It's something to do with your autonomic nervous system, your adrenal system, pituitary doesn't send the right signals. So like whenever I go out and whenever I go out and I work out in them, I don't even
I didn't even know there were like 3 things going on at the same time. What were we doing? So the ones here. And they were all right down. Okay, yeah. Is that what it was? These would be. There's only one other group. As far as I understand.
Just before anything bad happened. it's live and it's being recorded, so then we can post. So so the YouTube will be showing whatever we have in the screen.
Sure.
And your voice on top of it.
Okay. All right.
And they should be. I checked it from my computer and from my desktop. And
Right.
it was working just fine.
Fantastic. Okay. So
I put the link and everything is in the even your presentation.
fantastic. Okay. Good. Yeah.
That's one. And then there's climate data. And then it's just a way to kind of. But,
so now we have under file storage we have the presentation, all
Nice.
the other documents, the live broadcast.
people have to reconcile like traditional statistics versus machine learning. The statistics in ecology is like
You can buy back in time.
and I think people, especially older people, prefer this. Right?
Ah, nice. Yeah.
I still
No,
have to
no voice
convince
because the
my
mic is on.
Yeah.
that machine learning is worthwhile.
And so I can.
Yes. So what do you have HTML?
Yeah. I can do either.
There's just one of the kind of ideas I have is like visualizing the advantages machine learning would have. Like I was just
USB-C, everything these days. And then
Journal trick, which is like this one machine learning algorithm for perfect machines. Supposedly sometimes like something physical use is that like assumes relationships are linear, that they have to, they can't do things. But then when you have data where it's like no linear separation, support vector machines can help delineate them because they have a higher dimension. Yeah, it's like they're able to add this like third dimension to it, and then you can see if it's for like data, environmental data, so maybe
YouTube upon YouTube upon YouTube.
even though we know because this is generated data, there's some signal. This one's kind of more clear, but it could be just a full-on.
We switch the camera to the back,
Okay.
so it's going to be pointing to the video.
Fantastic.
Hey, can you hear me? I guess you can.
Yep.
I thought that was cool. Then I would try and illustrate like a statistical approach can only go this far.
Yes, we can hear you, Ani.
That'd be cool.
Can you hear me?
I got it.
Yeah, we can hear you, Ani.
Just I thought that could be oh, it's just okay.
I think this is a good one.
Alright.
I will be showing the presentation. And you
Fantastic. Yeah.
it's just economically that's the main reason. Yeah, other areas in well, for the climate part, I don't know, because that's the new angle. The environmental stuff, yes. Like people have used neural networks to predict like how much of like certain objects grow. But these are all really old for some. So if that was the case, then yeah, and I'm not sure. I think it just fell out of favor because like at that time it was novel. Maybe I am using it as precedence, but there's like this kind of gap. There's really old papers when.
Oh,
and then there's papers now. Very recent
no.
papers.
I mean, I'd just click on the full screen. And,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That will do.
Legacy.
There you go.
People actually using the system. I don't know.
And so, how do I project this now? Yeah.
What would you say, like how much? And what is the problem? So you're trying to solve? Are you trying to solve a prediction problem, or are you trying to solve?
All right, perfect.
I don't have
Well,
any particular problem I'm trying to solve. I just feel like could be like trying to find relationships without having to
Fantastic.
radically transform, without having to assume and like look at tons of like if I were to use unsupervised learning,
Oh, you put your standard destination.
Yeah. Better.
Then maybe some of these patterns can be determined, right? More apparent that human.
There we go.
Withdraw kind of data, see if there's but like deep learning is like not, it's not like that. Deep learning requires like tons of image data. Okay. But there's other newer. Yeah, like. Why is it so necessary? It just works well.
Classification is a lot more strict.
So would you be able to handle, are you on the Slack right now? So during the presentations chat, would you be able to handle any questions that we get from that side? Okay. For the presentation, it'll be presentation chat for the questions.
Whatever tool. But like, yeah, there's a lot of like. It just works really well. Same with the finance, like finance. The thing with linear model question is
Right. That's one of the things. I can't understand what Paul's saying. A lot of people don't.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
even if the output is accurate.
Yeah.
The logic, internal logic, is what people are really hung up.
Yeah. So have you ever looked at? This is a really. No, it's not for. No, it's for any kind of data. Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to show that. Where, so for example, you have a data set. So essentially, have clusters of orange points. This have like a there. You can actually add more. And each of the neurons is basically responsible for either like high levels on point. So this neuron will classify. So if I have four data layers are like learn pluralism. And so here you can actually figure out so you actually have
Well, how is this determined? Like what? Like if you were to just look at like something that's far more.
Yes, and
that's even.
Yeah. You basically compute it, it just becomes incompetent. Kind of like what it is. If you look at the
Can you try the YouTube to see, make sure that we can actually hear it?
there has been yeah.
So this is what you're talking about earlier, when visualizing what the internal logic of these networks is.
Exactly.
And it becomes
Yeah, okay.
In this neural network, this is probably basically different data layers. This has like a word, kind of a very low-level representation of what
I think she was saying in
neurons are
Zoom
trying to
for me.
So this one's basically trying to detect. And as you go on the different layers, as you go down the layers, the neurons develop higher and higher level of stress. This one's responsible for like.
Right.
So if you have something like that, to show, this is what the learning model is currently, then that would be like, oh, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, like you can have a rough idea of the logic.
Right.
A rough idea. So
even here, yeah.
You want to unmute also Zoom?
No, I don't. I think we want to keep it just one. Let's try to keep it simple.
We can have both. They shouldn't interfere.
But like I don't know how it's getting.
Yeah. So.
And the thing is that you can do so much. Like neural so many basically like a lot of it's like training rate, like you can get to like 80%. No matter what. It'll just be like a lot of high.
Right, yeah. Well, that's the problem.
That's the problem. So even doing this, there's still like a danger that you're just predicting. Hey, that's like you don't. Neural network doesn't really doesn't really understand the concept. It's just like. So you start to use it as a tool.
Yes, we can do a test before we start.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to coordinate with them. Yeah.
Next time it's going to be smooth.
Yeah.
That's like the nicest one I've ever seen. So.
And it's done in it's done in JavaScript.
Yeah, it's like D3J.
Did you guys throw this in the?
No, I think this is not D3. I think this is custom built by Google. This is like custom built.
Yeah.
What is open source? Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think they actually they made their own.
Yeah, they made a neural network library in JavaScript.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't need GPU.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
It's hard to. There's one that visualizes neural network with handwriting, like the MNIST handwriting data set. Visualize that. That's also and it shows you like how what the different neurons are contributing, like how they're detecting and the curves.
There's a serial filter.
But I think this is
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
hot topic of like gaining intuition into system.
Yeah.
I think they have.
Can you send us the YouTube link? Okay. You already sent the YouTube link out again.
Yeah, well, they have the wrong one in the web page.
Okay.
But in our web page, why don't you send us our web page?
Yeah.
Is the link.
That's the bias on the neuron.
Or you can open it and it will say,
Yeah.
So that's the first one, live broadcast. Because it changed every
Yeah,
time that
okay,
you do
yeah.
a new live broadcast, right? I think the one they have is the one that we did last time for the testing.
Yep.
Hashtag hackathon goal. Yeah.
Just download it.
Yeah, you clone it yourself. Make it too much. Change the colors. There, exactly.
Yeah.
So we build on top of an open source. Don't mention how much they did.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hey, Bonnie, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Apologize to anyone else who's listening to this. I am talking right now. I am talking right now.
There is some delay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there is a bit of a delay.
5 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there is a bit of a delay.
Yeah, okay, there we go. That's the delay.
That's the delay.
Yeah, there we go. Any luck? Check 1 2, check 1 2, check 1 2. Check. In.
The number of articles in Australia. I couldn't find anything that matched.
Okay. So Bonnie's looking.
No, but just to see, no, you think it's predictable, but like the point is like the anomalies. That's the interesting thing. The Gillette commercial. The Gillette commercial. Dude, that's only.
So it's their system. Because if you can hear the lab.
Yeah, we can hear it here. So yeah.
The other side is China.
Yeah. No, but you won't see any data for that.
Are you guys going through the GDELT stuff?
Yeah. Well, that'd be neat if there wasn't data on China.
Oh yeah, no, there definitely is. Like, yeah, there's definitely China data from China from GDELT. Yeah. I mean, it's easy to get stuff out of China. It's not easy to put stuff in China.
No, I don't know.
It's true.
There's so much data.
Of actual positions of like predicted.
And then have that as a screensaver. Eat up.
Constantly.
You should be able to screen when you start.
Sure, yeah. No, it's basically hard. But it's been very extrapolate.
No, something's me.
Learn some visualization. My research needs like some sexy. That's too hard.
Boo! Horrible pun! Horrible pun!
Subset of the word? Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, let's look at
We're just waiting for them at the moment.
There has been like some clear correlation to that, like unrest. Like of course, like higher temperatures, or even just like seasonal changes, like there's more crime and warmer conditions, just because we work people outside. Like that's not good.
And then we can show full correlation of how much ice cream people buy from crime.
There's also that as a famous one. Yeah. But
Wait, people buy a lot of ice cream with crime?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, there's more ice cream sales on days with like higher homicide or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a curious correlation.
Okay, yeah. Ice cream causes crime.
Ice cream is bad for you.
Yeah. Sponsored by the frozen yogurt lobby.
But one thing that's kind of cool is like climate change affects like health effects as an intersection of urban, like how urban an environment is. That's also something to talk about. It's like the fewer plants that are in certain parts of it, which also correlates with glowing like some models show that like one mature tree uses a local environment, like maybe Celsius cooler, right? Whereas like Scarborough, like, you know, in a certain light industrial area, it's just like all, and then it would get a lot hotter. So a tree is, there's shade and there's also evaporative. Like a tree is also like and like going through the process of certain. I think there's a bunch of factors. I'm not interesting model. So then there's that. That'd be fun. Anti-vax. Or show them like incidents of them across show that there's no correlation. Like diagnosis size. The argument originally come from one doctor that has since been scrapped. I think like
He's been stripped of the like actual like standing.
that one paper I think is where this all comes from. One paper that showed a link. Autism and
Have you read the paper?
No,
It doesn't actually even show a link. It is a throwaway sentence in there.
so one sentence.
It's a throwaway single sentence. Yeah.
So someone else.
It's kind of like when. Well, I think it's also like he then pushed it as like that's what he get away with in peer review, and then he's like that's what it showed. It's like when we say that this might be possible alien life. It's like could probably exactly yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. No. He's to blame, but.
And then find out like in school he's making bullshit up.
You're looking at like redactions?
No. Like yeah. So a lot of these like articles would cite like other articles, and if you keep following it, someone's right.
Well, or it's true. Like,
what do you mean someone's right?
Well, like if you follow it back far enough, you'll see that the axiom that a lot of these articles and stuff.
Oh,
that goes against.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And so,
well, I don't think this database is like website.
No, well, I got that idea from your
Oh, yeah, but I was talking about like journal articles that have a
this is really hard. Not accessible. Do they have like researchers? Oh yeah, GDOL, yeah. Like each paper, all like citations, and then all those papers like so there's like network. It would be cool to see it. One shitty paper has inspired a lot of other crowd.
Oh yeah.
This is. Yeah. There's an idea. Have you ever heard of Did you? Really? I used to go on
Sorry for the delay. They're still trying to get audio set up on their side to hear us. So, yes, the struggle. The border, it's hard, TSA agents aren't allowing audio to go through. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also the government's shutdown, all of it.
They're not working at
Fantastic. All right, they have audio now, so as soon as they give me the cue, we can start. All right, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And you guys have heard a lot from me in this room. Hopkins people, welcome. And first, you'll be hearing from me. Thank you for coming out to the hackathon. I'm excited to be able to do the first talk and sort of spell out some ideas of visualization. People in Toronto have heard a little bit of my intro, but briefly for people who are watching from Baltimore, I'm a research scientist here at the University of Toronto in the Dunlap Institute for Astronomy and Astrophysics. I work on big data astronomy and intensive data astronomy, both on a observational and on a theoretical side. And I'm really have a great deal of interest in visualization in general and visualization challenges when it comes to sort of big data and extracting as much information that you can get out of the data. For those of you who are new to Hopkins or haven't arrived in the past 2 years, I used to be a postdoc back there. So I'm excited to be able to do a joint thing with my home institution and my past home institution. So thank you for having me. Just to start off, just want to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron, Wendat, Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We're grateful to have this hackathon on their land. So let's start off with a quote from a notable source, Donald Rumsfeld, from back in, I believe it was 2003. As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the things that we don't know we don't know. That's probably a handful. I prefer a version that's from a Persian poet, Ibn Yamin, on the four types of man. But it really, I think, describes when we're investigating, when we're trying to do science, when we're trying to understand the physical or social world around us, are challenges. So one who knows and knows that he knows, his horse of wisdom will reach the sky. One who knows but doesn't know that he knows, he's fast asleep, so you should wake him up. One who doesn't know but knows that he doesn't know, his limping mule will eventually get him home. And one who doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know, he will be eternally lost in his hopeless oblivion. It's very uplifting stuff. But it's a good description of, for instance, when you know things, that is essentially the bookmark or the hallmark of known science. This is what we've tried to go through. This is what we've tried to understand. We've investigated thoroughly, and this is what we think we know. When you know, but you don't know that you know. For instance, you have a bunch of data that you've collected, and the information of what you're trying to seek is there, but you don't know that it's there. A lot of this is what we'd consider archival science. This is a huge avenue that we have available to us today, simply because we're collecting data at unprecedented rates. When you don't know, but know you don't know, this is what we call discovery science. This is when you know that there's a relationship out there, when there's some information or process or procedure in the data, but you don't know that it's there. You're trying to discover it. You're in a different mode than if, let's say, that you're just trying to refine some parameter or some theory that you already have. And then finally, when you don't know that you don't know, this is when we start to get serendipitous science, when you accidentally stumble upon something. So what I'm going to posit to you today is that visualization is a tool to get those last three. we often talk about the first one, and that's our, how we think science typically works. We know something, and we want to know it better, so we go down that path. Where visualization comes in is where we don't know something, and we don't know it, then we don't know that we know it, or we know that we don't know it. Just to make this a little clearer, let's do a very crude approximation of how we think science works. So we assume, typically, most scientists, or a lot of scientists, myself included, that we have this magical thing called data. It exists, it's there, it's in the world. We are taking a look at this representation of the world that is just inherently good and inherently true. Then we use some sort of magic sauce called science, and some process that gives us something, and from there we have facts. That is sort of this idealistic worldview of how science works. But let's actually talk about how we go about these processes and where visualization fits in. So if this is a more or less crude approximation. It's certainly not 100% true, but we do have data. Data is something that we collect, that we've made observations for. But importantly, the process through which we collect that data is something we need to think about in and of itself. You don't actually, data is not the natural world. Data is not the universe. It is somehow collected and filtered and sorted through that process to tell you something about that natural world. We then go and take this data, and we can often use mathematical models. From first-year physics, we know that F equals ma, and you can say that if we understand all these accelerations or measure these accelerations for something, we can then turn that into a force and compare it and do something like that. This is all just examples of possible mathematical models that one could use to try to infer something about that data. You can also just try to apply statistical tests. You can say, hey, I've got a bunch of points. I'm going to take the mean. I'm going to take the median. I'm going to figure out what the standard deviation is. This tells me something about this data. And from those things, we come up with inferences about the data that we've collected. But all these middle steps, the mathematical models, the statistical tests, they are methods for us to come upon the data and try to infer something from it. What I posit to you is visualization is another method that works with these two. That the best way to view visualization in a scientific context is another way to try to understand and infer something from the data. And the big thing is that it is complementary with the mathematical models. It's complementary with the statistical tests. Right? Oftentimes you'll go from a visualization that tells you that the data has this structure or that it has these features in it, and then you can go and refine with statistical tests or mathematical models what it's saying. But the key point I want to make here is that visualization is a process to understand the data. It's not just something you do after the fact. It's not once you know the data and you want to present it. Yes, you'll want to visualize it at that point too, but it's a way of exploring that data and seeing all the underlying relationships with it. And importantly, specifically for the purpose of visualization, these are human processes. We have our innate things that we're good at. We have our innate things that we're bad at. We have our cultural conceptions surrounding it. We make choices in how we collect this data to begin with. These are all going to be inherent in how the data exists, and it's also going to be inherent in the inferences we make from that. And visualization is a tool that can allow us to see those inherent human biases, but it also can work towards them because there are things that humans tend to be good at in terms of visually identifying. We've been evolutionarily trained to make sure that we can understand when things are moving towards us, for instance. We've been evolutionarily trained to see very slight differences in color. Right? These are things that we can make and use to our advantage. And this is really what visualization is helpful at. So if there's one point that you take away from this first talk, it's that visualization is a filter through which to explore your data. Much like any sort of mathematical model, much like any sort of statistical test. It is simply a filter, and it can work with them. It can tell you some other properties of your data. But importantly, let's talk about what visualization is not. because there's often misconception. I know that especially in the natural sciences, there's a notion that visualization is this fuzzy thing that you do afterwards to make sure that your paper has more citations or that the press picks it up. But let's talk a little bit about the few things that it's not. First off, it is not making things look pretty. Right? That is, if things look pretty, that's fantastic and great, and I give you a gold star for that. But that's not the point of it. Right? It's trying to tell you something about the data itself. It's not inherently trying to make things look cool. Certainly, many visualizations will make your data or your science look cool or sexy. You can have rotating spheres and 3D models. These aren't inherently good visualizations. Right? They may not be telling you something different about your data. They may not be giving you some sort of underlying trend about that information. Right? So don't use these as your focus of when you're trying to visualize information. Also, it's not strictly about communication. Right? Communication is certainly, visualization is a good way of communicating information about your data or your science. It's not strictly that. It's also a way to tell you something about your science, to tell you something about all of the data that you've collected, all of the information that you've collected. But in the converse, it's also not a silver bullet that will solve all your data problems. I'm not standing up here and saying that with visualization, you don't need to use mathematical models. You don't need to use statistical techniques. What I'm saying is that it's a tool in your arsenal to help you leverage those other techniques in a better way to tell you more about the underlying natural world that you're trying to understand, or social world that you're trying to understand. So how do we go about it? There's something that often, if it isn't just something that we do at the end after we've understood our data, after we've understood what's happening, what is the process through which we try to create visualizations that tell us something interesting about our data? So designers tend to have an interesting view on this. And so a typical mode of workflow for design, people who are in design, is something called the double diamond method. So this is a graphic that was taken from the Design Council of the United Kingdom. And the idea here is when you have a design, when you're trying to come up with a design solution for something, you start with a problem. That's very similar to what we start with in science. But instead of trying to then solve that problem, you try to make sure that that is the right problem that you want to solve. Right? So you expand. The expansion, like the width of this diamond, is telling you that you're looking at the possible space of problems that you have. Right? Maybe that initial thought that you had of what problem needs to be solved is not the problem that is best solved by this. Once you have your large number of possible problems, at that point you can start to refine and define the actual problem area that you care about. What is the thing that is best represented by your data? What is the thing that is best or most interesting that comes from it? From there, this is a little more typical because typically in science, we start from this because we say we have a problem, let's start coming up with solutions. So the rest of this will seem familiar, and we start looking at the gamut of possible solutions, the gamut of possible ideas that we could try to solve that problem. Right? Maybe we should plot our data in a certain way. Maybe we should use X statistical test, or try to run this model, or run a Monte Carlo on it, or put it through a covariant, some sort of covariance matrix. Right? These are all possible ways, and we'll explore a lot of them. And then finally, once we figure out the one that is most likely to give it, we start to refine, and we come up with that solution. So what's often hard for scientists is this first half of trying to understand, is the problem actually the problem that can be solved with that data? The other thing that doesn't necessarily fit well with a lot of our notions of the way science works is designers recognize that this is not a linear process. You're going back and forth on these double diamonds regularly. You will try a problem. You will try to come to refine it. And then you'll realize that is probably not the problem that you want to do. And you'll go back to the refinement. There is an iterative process through this. And that's just a part of the game. And it's something that often I know in science we're not trained to really inherently think about. We're often trained to come up with the best solution first and then go through right till the end until we have that 7 sigma result or whatever. But the key of visualization is allowing yourself to make a few mistakes, to try a bunch of different things, and come back and give yourself the ability to say that didn't work, and let's try a different way of looking at our data. I'm mixing up buttons. There we go. Okay. So one other point that I want everyone to sort of filter what how to design visualizations, and arguably how to design scientific processes in general. Remember that these are human things, right? It is humans that collected the data. It's humans that chose which data to collect. It's humans that will be looking at said data and interpreting it. And it'll be humans that will be coming up with the inference of it. All of the tools that we have, be it statistical models, be it mathematical models, these are all things that we have chosen to apply. It's not inherently something in and of itself. So it's important that we understand how humans think about it. So a good text on this is Don Norman's The Design of Everyday Things. He actually has a fantastic TED Talk in Vox video on Norman doors, on the term that he coined, because of course naming something not so positive is a great way for you to be known. A Norman door is a door where the handle is the opposite of what you expect to do with it, right? Like when you try to push on a handle that clearly is meant to pull, right? And the argument behind it is that it's a design problem, that people didn't think about how humans interact with that particular challenge or that particular thing that they're trying to interact with. And so he's come up with a seminal text on how to design things for humans, how to think about how humans learn things. And this is particularly useful when thinking about how to design visualizations. So he comes up with basically 4 steps of how we interact with the world at large. And it would be similar to how a given human will interact with your visualization. The first one's mapping. The easiest way to know whether or not a visualization makes sense is if it maps to the way you see the world, right? A good example of this is actually just a physical map. You put it down on, the table, and Toronto will be right in the center because we're Toronto focused here. Ottawa will be on the right-hand side, and that is physically how they're laid out. An example of how this is done badly is how many of you guys have turned on your oven range or your stove and kept on getting the wrong one every single time, even though you know it's the wrong one, right? This is an example of poor mapping, right? Because the switches are not laid out in a way that you expect the actual objects to be, right? So this is an important thing to think about in terms of how we understand it. You want to, if you can, you want to encode that mapping information in your visualization. That's the easiest way for people to understand it. Secondly is feedback. Feedback is the notion of getting some sort of response based on your action, based on your interaction with that data, or with that method, right? A good example of this is elevator buttons. When you press on an elevator button, what happens if it doesn't light up? What's the typical thing that you do? You press it again, right? A good example of this is also like the sidewalk buttons that we've all learned do nothing effectively, right? We'll keep on pressing them until we have some sort of feedback. And this is particularly, again, useful in the context of visualization. If there's something that we should be doing or a way that we should be understanding this, it is useful for that visualization to have some sort of feedback. Right, you can do this interactively, right? A good example of this is, New York Times has a fantastic data viz studio. So when they have, interactions with, say, election results, there will be, when you click on something or you sort something, say that you're looking at the number of, electoral college votes that could potentially go one way or the other, it'll give you feedback on if you move something in one direction, where it should be going, or the other direction. So an important way of thinking about how to design something is how does your user have some indication that they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. The next thing is conceptual models. These don't need, and the key thing about conceptual models is they don't need to be inherently accurate, right? They just need to work for the situation that you're in, right? So this is basically developing your own black box in your head and saying that this plot or this device works that way, right? I press the button, the toaster turns on, it gives me hot toast, right? I don't need to know, every single little detail about what went into that toast, right? I click a button on some sort of plot, it gives me all of the things that are above some number of sigma, right? So coming up with a conceptual model that your user has for how that thing would work. A good example of this is Cartesian plots, right? The simple scatter plot. We've all been driven in with a conceptual model of how that should work, right? If things are further to the right and further to up, we think that it's highly positive, right? Because we've been built with that conceptual model since essentially, grade 5, grade 4 kind of thing? When was the first time that we talked about plotting things? Right, so that's it's a very powerful device if we have that conceptual model and if we build it. And then finally, cultural conventions. This is one of the hardest ones to do well, and if you can't build in a mapping or a feedback or some sort of conceptual model, cultural conventions are the ways that you can try to understand this. But this is one that you have to be very, very careful about, because cultural conceptions are very cultural, right? People will not necessarily interpret them in the exact same way. A good example of this is asking the question, is this line going up? Who here says this line is going up? If we ask this question in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi to Arabic speakers, they would say the opposite, that the line is going down, because one of the things that is built into the way that we think about it is our language processing. And the language processing of English speakers and most, Western Romance or, Germanic language speakers is that we go from left to right. And so there's a natural, there is a natural mapping onto what is up, what is, the correct direction for forward. But that's opposite for Semitic languages. And that is just something that's inherent in your brain. This is not something that just because you've been raised with, that you're familiar with it. This is something that is actually hardwired in your natural language processing units. And so it's hard to get around that. And it's really funny. So this is a technique. This entire idea of leading lines is something that you see in photography. It's actually an important photographic, note on how to pose people and whatever. If you look at poses and photographers that are primarily Arabic speakers or Hebrew speakers, they will do things very differently. They will have people go stand on the left versus the right, and it's fully based solely on this inherent notion, this cultural notion. So just a word of warning. So now that we have the playing field understood, now that we understand how we should be thinking about visually representing our data, let's talk a little bit about the grammar of visual elements. I'm going to define this as the ways that we encode information in visual forms. We often don't think about this because we often have been just taught to do a scatter plot or a bar plot or a pie chart or whatever, because that is prescriptively what we've been told. But a visualization is more than that, right? It is every single element that you use on that paper or on that screen is encoding some sort of information. So let's look at some of the ways that it's encoded. So let's start off with position, an old goodie, right? There's one that we have a very strong conceptual model of how it should work, and it allows us to represent 2 dimensions easily. Right, it's very simple, to put, a dot over here and a dot over here, and you can tell the relationship between the 2 of them in 2 dimensions very, very easily. And the great thing about it is that there's a strong cultural convention, right? The Cartesian plane has been drilled into us for a very, very long time. And so it's a nice, easy way to do it. But it also can be sometimes a lazy way of doing it, right? This may not be the best way of representing your data. But a good example of this is scatter plots in general. Scatter plots are essentially all the information is encoded in the relative positions of things on your page. Another example of this, so in this case, these are also just scatter plots where individually within them, the position encodes some sort of magnitude information in 2 dimensions, but between them, it's actually separating out categorical information. So you can actually represent both things with position. The reason I chose this particular plot is, does anyone know what is the exact same about all of these distributions? And this is an example of why statistical tests are not sufficient to tell you about your data. The mean, one other thing. The mean and the standard deviation of all these distributions in the x-axis are the exact same. In fact, all of these bottom ones, the correlation coefficient is also the exact same, 0. Right? So now let's say that you had a bunch of data and you just did your statistical test. You did your mean, your standard deviation. In this case, even the range is the same. And you did a correlation coefficient. That should tell you a lot about your data at that point. And the data looks very, very different. Right? This is a prime example of how a simple visualization tells you more than a statistical test or statistical model would. Let's go to the next one, size. So this is one that we inherently use, but we don't necessarily always think about. So area as an indication of magnitude. One of the things that this allows you to do is do a very easy visual comparison between elements, right? This is a scalar kind of quantity, right? It is, you effectively can encode any random amount of size without fixed intervals between them, and you can compare things very easily. Right, so this is an example from, I believe, the UN HIV summary from 2016, I believe, talking about the size of the AIDS epidemic. So on the left-hand side, this is, comparing, for instance, this is the fraction of people that know about their HIV status versus the entire box. Right? On the right-hand side, we now have a breakdown on a per-country level. And you can right off the bat say, wow, it's not great to be in South Africa right now if you don't want HIV, or if you're trying to treat HIV. But you know what? The Latin America, it's not actually doing too badly in comparison. And this is just encoded information. We are biologically ingrained to understand size and to affix size with importance, unfortunately a little too strongly. But we can use size information as a way of encoding information that you care about. Another simple example that everyone either loves or hates, pie charts. This is a pie chart of pi. And in this case, again, it is literally just the area on the two-dimensional plane that is encoding information for you. In this particular case with pie charts, there is a very strong cultural understanding of what they should look like. So we're building in both of those. Let's move on to shape. So shape's an interesting one because what it can do is it can encode categorical information. Let's say that you have data that has similar scalar properties. Similar properties in that have quantifiable, but they are from 2 different data sets. You can use shape as an effective way of encoding that information. Right? It's as simple as on a scatter plot using X's and O's for 2 different data sets. Right? That's the simplest way that one can use shape. But also, you can use mappings or cultural conventions to understand what each of these shapes is supposed to entail. Right? In this case, for just a simple flow chart, the 2-dimensional locations don't actually mean a lot in a flowchart, right? Like the fact if I put this here or this here, it wouldn't matter, right? However, the fact that these look like arrows is a cultural convention of saying something is connected, right? That's where the shape encoding is coming from. And it's a way of thinking about that. The fact that this, if you read a lot of flowcharts, the fact that that is a diamond indicates something to you about whether or not that is a choice, right? That is information that is encoded in you because you've seen these before, And it's an interesting and easy way of encoding information. But this is far from my favorite flowchart. Just this one is a great one that represents a certain song. Unfortunately, the shapes are all the same, but thickness. Every shape, and this is somewhat subtler, more subtle than size. Thickness is particularly useful, and it's underutilized. For instance, the thickness of lines or the thickness of points, etc. Because what it allows you to do is gives you a very easy way of visually categorizing information. Right? Here is the Toronto streetcar and subway map. And you can right off the bat, just based on the thickness of the lines, tell you what are the major or more important lines and what are the minor ones. This is particularly useful, especially if you have auxiliary data or if you have some sort of reference frame. For instance, you can think of major or minor ticks as encoding that information. The thickness of the tick will tell you whether or not it's a major or minor tick, and you don't even need to communicate that. Right? It's just inherent in the fact that you've seen it to be larger or smaller. Color is one that is incredibly powerful, but can also be has had a lot of debate surrounding it. People have opinions about color very, very quickly. One of the nice things about color is that it encodes magnitude. Right? You can easily come up with mappings that encode some form of magnitude, where you can't numerically pull off what that is, but what it allows you to do is do comparisons very quickly. Our eyes are very well attuned at being able to see distinctions between colors. Right? You can tell that one side of the sky is bluer than the other side of the sky. So very, very quick comparisons are easily done with color. And because of that, notions of variation and variations and gradients are easy to understand with color. So you can have the potential of encoding large ranges of information variation. But importantly, there is no inherent numeracy to the top of this versus the bottom of this. You don't know if this is, a factor of 2 different. You don't know if this is a factor of 20 different. That is an advantage of color. People often see that as a disadvantage because then you expect to have a color bar there. But what it can allow you to do is highlight the kinds of variations that you want to highlight. Right? It is inherently a comparative measure. And so, for instance, let's say that you had some sort of feature where there's a lot of variation off the bottom level, at the noise level. Let's say that you're measuring the altitude of something on one side of the mountain. And then on the top of the mountain, you have a lot of variation as well. You can create color maps that increase the variation that you see at those particular levels and have very little variation between the two. So that's the power of using color. For our American friends, just to give you a sense of the polar bear landscape in Canada and the Arctic for the most part. Another great use of color is categorical information. Being able to say something about categories distinctly without us having to specifically look at any given thing and say, hey, which category is it? We don't have to do the filtering in our head. Our eyes are doing that for us. Opacity. So this is one that's often used in conjunction with color. So it provides a crude information on the magnitude of some sort of visual change. So a good example of this is radar maps, where oftentimes the lighter the rain or the less rain that you have in that area, it is, in a lighter, I can't actually use my pointer, there's less opacity. You can see more of what's underneath it. Where there's more of something, there's, the greater opacity, or sorry, the other way around. You can see less through it. And this encodes a crude sense of magnitude as well. So you can use this in complement with colors. But in essence, that's effectively what you have. if you're trying to represent your data visually, especially in a two-dimensional form, that's what you got. And every single visualization that you see is a combination of each of these features put together in some way that's optimized for whatever purpose it was optimized for originally. So how do we use these elements? So one of the things that I'm going to ask you guys over the next 2 days is try to be unconstrained by legacy. Right? There's a lot of ways that we think about how we should be plotting data. I'm sure I remember my first year labs where we drilled into us, how exactly to plot things up, and that you had to have an x-axis that was this long, and there was an arrow on one side, and you had to label it in a certain way. Let yourself free of that, especially for this weekend. So as an example, this is an example that's provided by Tufte as the visual display of quantitative information. I'd strongly recommend if you care about visualization, definitely pick that up or take a read of it. And this is a 2D scatter plot, right? Everyone's seen this, something that we just all have. The information is encoded by position, essentially, of every single location. Let's think about how we can make that better. What is other information that we could encode that would be useful in a positional display of information in this encoding? Well, maybe one of the things that you care about is the range of your data, right? There's no reason inherently for these things to cross. You can use these lines instead of as a guide as some way to encode information, and that information can be the maximum and minimum point that you have. And so now in this particular version of it, now you have a sense of the exact range of your data both in the x and the y-axis. So you've now encoded more information on essentially the same graph. But maybe you want to do more than that. This is another example where every single dot here, instead of having a line, you have a tick for. Right? We were all told that ticks should be uniform. We were all told that they should go, in a specific increment. Why? It might be easier to compare things if you had a piece of paper and ruler. Sure, that's a valid use of it. But it doesn't have to be that way. So in this particular case, now we have a tick for every single dot. So now you could potentially read off the exact location of a bunch of these. You could label a certain number of these to give precise values of those locations. But more than that, a lot of the information is in the relationship between each of these visual elements. Right? You look at that now, and I can now tell you a rough histogram of where those points are in the x and the y direction, right? I can tell you that most of the points on the x direction are over here, and most of the points in the y direction are over here. And all of that is encoded in basically axis lines that normally are kind of useless. So all of this is to make the point that you want to be unconstrained, especially for the purpose of this hackathon. You want to be unconstrained from conventional norms. Allow yourself to think about, why does that piece of ink need to go on that piece of paper? Does it encode anything? Is it doing anything useful for me? Is that the point of it? So another point that I'd like to make about when you start to combine these elements is that there tends to be a fixation, especially in the natural sciences, about the need to show raw data. And this is an example I'm going to give you from my own research. This is actually a paper that I did back when I was a grad student. And in here, we have the location of every single star in some place in the galaxy that is between a certain set of colors. And it was bugging me for the longest time. There should be something in there. You might be able to see it, right? But there's not a good indication that there's something in there. And there is an obsession in me, and driven by every single class I've been taught, and that I need to show the raw data. That what matters most is the location of those individual points. If you lose that information, then you are losing something. But the point I'd like to make is that every way that we look at data is some sort of filter of information, right? When I was looking just at those raw points, I was filtering information at the largest scales. So I could create a visualization that filtered, that did the exact opposite, that removed all of the small scales and only gave me the largest scales. And suddenly, what I was looking for popped out immediately. The point I want to make with this is that a lot of the information, yes, can be in individual points, can be in their individual location, but a lot of information, especially as we get to more complex data sets, are in the relationship between points. There's a lot of information encoded there. And sometimes that's where the relationships will lie. That's where you'll find your information. So don't be afraid to fixate, or don't be afraid to lose that fixation on showing specific raw data. Because if that's not the point of that visualization, that's not the point of that visualization. If that's not where the information is, it's not where the information is. I'm just going to take a minute here and talk a little bit about typography. So typography is something that I personally am a big fan of because I really, really hate some fonts. For instance, Computer Modern. Can't stand it with a 10-foot pole. If you guys don't use LaTeX, then you are a much happier person because it's the default font there, and it makes me want to punch something. But let's talk about the information that's actually encoded in this, because again, typography uses, the use of type and the use of language on a visualization is something different than just using points, because our brains have a way of connecting to it immediately. When we read words, we don't read every single letter individually. We actually read them as a total sum. Right? This is just the way that our brains filter language. So it has a very unique purpose. And one of the things that you can do with language is, and especially the use of typography, is use it to indicate categorization or structure of your data, or of the visualization. A fantastic example of this is the maps. The National Geographic has been doing this for years, where every single structure or every single thing on the map has a specific typeface, has a specific weight, has a specific italicism, etc. Because what it does is it indicates, when you just quickly look at the map, what's of the greatest importance in that area, what's of the least importance in that area, and you have essentially another structure laid upon it. You know right off the bat which are the big cities, which are the small cities. You know right off the bat what are the larger political structures like New York and Pennsylvania, what are the smaller political structures. And all of this is just simply encoded because of the use of very fixed categorized typography. Again, you're encoding information that you don't normally think about, but your brain gets it for you. I can also rant on about typography for a while, but I'm not going to do that. Okay. So how about big data and machine learning? Where does this all fit in? So we're in an era of big data. This is something that you hear taglines about. It's in basically every sort of funding proposal or grad school application or postdoc application that you've seen in. But what does it actually give us? So the easiest thing to do with larger amounts of data, larger and larger amounts of data, is to do the exact same thing we used to be doing, but do it more precisely. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some parameters we want to know. Some quantities are so important that we want to know them very, very accurately. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But I posit to you that that is not where the potential of big data comes from. What I argue is that the potential of big data is in the exploration of its complexity. No longer are we looking for one or two numbers to describe an entire data set. We're able to understand subtle variations in them. We're able to understand relationships that we wouldn't be able to pull out if we just had 10 or 20 or 30 data points. So this is where we want to try to go with big data. And so let's go back to this sort of mental map, this conceptual image of how I'm arguing that science works. And we have these three different kind of models, or different kind of techniques that allow us to go from data that we've collected to an inference about it. My argument is that machine learning of any sort is basically just another one of these. Right? It's just another tool that we should be using in conjunction with absolutely everything. So just a brief note, because I know it's a buzzword, and let's talk about specific definitions here. So what is machine learning? What am I arguing machine learning is? So basically, the notion of machine learning is that these are algorithms or statistical techniques that progressively improve upon their ability to perform a task, whatever that task may be, without being explicitly programmed to do that task. Right? You're trying to get something from the data inherently. You're trying to get your algorithm to learn what it needs to learn without you telling it exactly what you need to know. More colloquially, however, what I argue is that what machine learning really is, it's a loose aggregation of algorithms that we have the data quantity and computational power to use to tell us something about it. That's really why machine learning is a big thing now. We've got large data sets that we've collected a lot of information about, and we have the computational power to actually do something with them now. So it's a very unstructured term. And so I just want you to think about it as a series of tools that have its pluses and minuses. So just a quick thing on the different types of machine learning and sort of the problems that can come with it. So first off, we have supervised learning. So this is when we have a data set where we know what the answer for some fraction of it is. So we're using these algorithms to tell us the answer that we think it is. Right? Let's say that you have a bunch of videos on YouTube and you want to sort them into cat videos and non-cat videos, which, by the way, is one of the easiest separations of YouTube videos. It was one of the first things that was done with deep learning, was separating cat videos and non-cat videos. This is an example of supervised learning. You know the answer, so you're supervising the algorithm or semi-supervising the algorithm to tell you something, to distinguish and discriminate between different possibilities. Unsupervised learning. This is where you're trying to find structures in the data. You're not telling it an answer to come up with, but you are telling it, hey, here's my data. Find ways of categorizing it. Find ways of clustering it. Tell me something inherent about the data. And then finally, reinforcement learning. Let's say that I want some quantity to be maximized. Let's say that I want, for instance, I know some of you guys were talking about it earlier, I want my portfolio to be the biggest, right? I want to make as much money on the stock market as possible. That can be my cost function. That could be something that I'm going to say I want to maximize, and now let's have algorithms that try to do that for me. That's what reinforcement learning is. These are the sort of three large, broad categories. But all of them have significant challenges that come with them. And this is where I think visualization really helps when talking about machine learning. So the two that I'm going to just say briefly are, first of all, understanding uncertainty. One of the big challenges in the way that we typically do science is that we try to understand how well we know a statement that we're making. This is critical, right? If we don't know it particularly well, it doesn't actually tell us something about the world it's trying to describe or the nature it's trying to describe. How reliable are the results of the finding? What do they depend on? Where are the relationships that we don't know about? So an example of how we would often do this in, especially linear regression kind of models are corner plots, where we take every possible variable that we can think of that would affect it and plot it up against another variable. These are great in cases where there are only a handful of variables or they have very simple relationships between them. That's not inherently the case when it comes to machine learning algorithms, where a given algorithm that's supposed to do the exact same thing gives you a different answer in the example of different clustering algorithms. Right? This is a good example of, from the scikit-learn documentation, of if you give different clustering algorithms the exact same set of data, how do they come up with the clusters? And there's various reasons for why they come up with the clusters in certain ways, because they've categorized them. The color in this case is the categorization of every single cluster. But they're not all the same. And they will be optimized in different circumstances for different reasons. Can we come up with visualizations that better help us understand why that is the case? Understanding bias. So a tweet that went viral yesterday, I actually think yesterday or the day before, was from a Democratic congresswoman's tweet talking about some of the racism that exposes itself through different machine learning kind of algorithms and arguments that happen about it. But this is something that we know, that there is inherent bias that comes out of these algorithms because there's inherent bias in how we've designed the data collection. Right? The algorithms tell us just as much about the process and choices we make to collect the data as they do about the data itself. How do we start to show this? How do we start to explore this? This is not an easy question. But potentially with the, with pairing up machine learning algorithms with visualizations that can potentially compare things for us, we can start to beat down a lot of these issues or start to talk about where they're coming in. And that's incredibly powerful. That's something that we don't inherently have in a lot of classical science. We don't inherently know, or may not have the statistics to say something about how we're collecting that data at smaller data sets. We potentially do now. So I don't want to frame this as a bad thing. I want to frame this as a good thing, that we can start to actually understand our biases. Something I want everyone to think about is, what are the areas that matter for your particular use cases in your particular research? How will machine learning affect your field? And something I'd love for conversations to start up with. Because these algorithms are here. They're not going anywhere. We have the computational power. They're often 2 lines of code in Python or R to do. We're going to use them. So the question is, what are the areas that they're going to make a difference, and what are the areas that we shouldn't be using them? And what are the kind of tools that we need to understand that? And how can we build them? Can we build these visualization tools to do that? So I just want to leave you with a couple of keynotes from this in terms of takeaways to think about when building visualizations, especially in the era of big data and machine learning. So first off, remember that visualization is just a way of interpreting the data. It's not something you do at the end. It's a way of understanding what you have to begin with. Every single element in a visualization encodes some sort of information. Be purposeful about what you're encoding. This is how you get very complex sets of information and can see relationships that you otherwise wouldn't if you just looked at a table of numbers. Don't limit yourself to classic tropes, right? Just because we've all been taught what a scatter plot is and what a pie chart is, doesn't mean you have to use them. Doesn't mean you have to use them in that exact way. Machine learning and visualization have complementary goals. They're trying to make sense of some sort of complexity that you don't necessarily know is there. And so use them. Use them together. And visualization can be that tool to understand how machine learning unravels this complexity. And with that, I say thank you, and hopefully we'll go forth and code for the next couple days. Thanks so much.
There's one question in the Slack that
Sure.
I think it was answered. You showed the example where it says the same system.
Yeah.
At least that's part that's exactly the same direct.
That's actually a Creative Commons graphic on correlation coefficients, Pearson correlation coefficients. So you can actually get that from Wikipedia.
Okay, because someone was saying that it's the data set that apparently.
Okay, all right, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Okay, I'll definitely, yeah. Thanks. Any questions from the local group? Sure. Oh yeah, no, they're incredibly biased, right? Like the reinforcement ones are basically you're choosing your method. I mean, it is. Yeah. I mean, they are like, okay. So I think one of the things that's always difficult to do with categorization in machine learning is a good example of this is they're fuzzy borders, right? But I think there is something inherent to be sort of thought of in terms of these kind of algorithms that have a cost function. It's because you've essentially chosen a cost function that may or may not be inherent in the data. Right, and so there is a choice. There is a physical human choice that you're making there that you may have unintended consequences. And so I think that's worthy of some other, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
So we have some questions that they are going.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah. Sorry. So the question that was just talked about is the reinforced learning versus supervised learning. Is, are they actually overlapping? Yeah, certainly they are overlapping, because the notion of reinforced learning is that you have some cost function that you've chosen, so therefore there's a parameter that you're trying to select for. So it is a supervised form of learning as well, but the reason that I'm making a distinction, and the reason a lot of people make distinctions, is because that cost function can be arbitrary, and you have to choose it in of yourself, and so that can introduce a great deal of biases, etc. Oh, okay, all right, yeah. Sure. Welcome to the abyss. Sure, yeah, actually, while we're waiting.
You mentioned scatter plots.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's a...
Yeah. I think whisker plots are a good example of that. Right, we're starting to get into an area where people care about error. People care about how well you know something, and that's starting to actually appear, especially in a lot of data journalism. About, one talks about margins of polls all the time. That's a good example of something that's starting to come up. Histograms, I would say that histograms have certainly entered the scientific lexicon. I think they're starting to really show up in popular lexicon as well. So that's one that I'd also put at that border of people are starting to know inherently that's a histogram. I understand what that means. Network diagrams, right? Like, I think that's one that isn't inherently, we had not necessarily a lot of reason to think about interconnections easily. Like, people in certain technical fields, specifically like electronics or electrical engineering, cared a lot about network diagrams and understanding how paths connect. That's starting to actually show up a lot more. If anyone here reads The Economist, you're seeing a lot more of that in terms of how wealth transfers between countries and trade things. So that's starting to enter the lexicon. But those are examples. Does anyone else have any other examples? I'm certainly not the... Yeah. Oh, sure, yeah.
And someone was asking, while you try to bring over folks back, if they can rewatch the thing again, they can watch it in the YouTube channel.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Awesome.
Yeah, I am on Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I think there's going to be a delay because you're going through Zoom, we're going through YouTube. Or I could just unmute it on. Yeah.
Okay, great. So did you already answer the question that Rafael Santos asked earlier? The reference?
The reference one? Yes, okay, so the reference for the distributions that were all sort of the same correlation coefficient, same standard deviation mean, that's actually on Creative Commons. So it's on Wikipedia on the Pearson correlation coefficient webpage, I believe. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's cool. I do like the data source.
And one other question was about whether the actual talk will be available afterwards as will it be recorded and available.
I'm posting right now in the Slack channel the YouTube link.
So Marcelo's posting the Slack, the YouTube link on the Slack channel. So yes, it will be available on YouTube.
So I had one question myself.
Sure.
So you said earlier that the purpose of visualization is not to make pretty pictures or make it look cool.
Right.
But doesn't it actually depend on what your purpose or the audience is? For example, if you want to put something in an article in the popular press, you want to captivate people's attention.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that can be a sort of a secondary or tertiary goal of the visualization, but at the end of the day, what you're trying to do in the popular press is still convey some sort of information and encoding. The pickup of it, making it cool and making it look pretty, that matters. I'm certainly not saying that it doesn't matter, but what I'm saying is that let's think about the primary purposes first and design for that, and then the cool and the pretty and the the thing that makes it press-worthy, that can come next. Right? That's something that you don't need to inherently design for. You can design around the data constraints, essentially.
Whereas nowadays you want clickbait as well.
Oh yeah, certainly. You probably, in fact, there's probably a project in here for somebody for the hackathon to do about what makes the best clickbait headlines or something like that. Yeah, we have a local question.
Yeah, I guess related to ethics of because make something look related when they're not.
Sure. Okay, so the question was, can I comment on the ethics of data visualization? Specifically in the notion of you can make things look related when they're not, or skew. A good example of this, which often happens, are certain cable news channels where they say that there's a significant increase, but they don't show the zero baseline. And so that significant increase is actually minimal in comparison to the total, right? Like, the deficit's increasing by a great deal. Like, it's going up by, billions, but, the actual budget's trillions, right? So yeah, no, this is something that is of importance. I think the challenge of it is you can use that tool, right? You can use that tool to mislead your viewers. There's actually a fantastic book called How to Lie with Statistics that talks a little bit about this. But the trick is that within visualizations, there are things that you can do. For instance, encoding more information that helps support these ideas, right? And I think that's where we can start talking about how to build a data visualization literacy in terms of how do you know something is actually being skewed or something is being truthful, right? For instance, showing more information about that data, having other data being encoded in those visuals that are analogous or give you additional support for the thesis that you're presenting, right? These are things that you can do to make it very blatantly clear that you're not trying to mislead people. And that's probably the easier way to go about, as opposed to trying to convince people to not sell their snake oil with plots that look like it's all effective. Do we have any other questions? If you don't, we can always throw them in the Slack, and I'm happy to answer them that way. But thank you guys so much. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with through the hackathon, both here in Toronto and over in Baltimore.
Hey, thank you very much for your
Thanks.
Maybe you can do this again next time you visit as a CAST seminar.
Sure, yes, I'd be happy to. All right, so I know it's a little afternoon. This room is certainly open. Feel free to continue discussions about your projects and your thoughts on what you want to play with. I'm here, Marcelo's here, in terms of helping you guys get data, getting access. Remember also in the Slack, there are help channels for both R, Python, Git. So if you guys want to start getting coded, we're going to crowdsource that information. And also, if you've already started and come up with a group of a project that you want to work on, feel free to create a Slack channel, Slack channel for the group to share information, share data, share locations of files, and the like. Awesome. But as always, lunch options are downstairs, so please remember to eat. Thank you.
Should we stop the streaming?
Yeah, I think let's stop the streaming, and then we can